Before we dive into the top 10 Halloween films, let's take a look at the Halloween movies that didn't quite make the cut. The first film that didn't make the cut is Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. Halloween 5. The Revenge of Michael Myers is a slasher flick from 1989, co-written and directed by Dominique Othenin-Girard. It features a cast that includes Donald Pleasence, Danielle Harris, Ellie Cornell, Bo Starr, Wendy Kaplan, and Tamara Glynn. This is the fifth movie in the Halloween franchise, and it picks up with the infamous killer Michael Myers making his way back to Haddonfield, where he's set on taking out his traumatized niece, Jamie Lloyd, with whom he has developed a creepy telepathic link. Halloween 5 hit theaters in North America on October 13th, 1989, and it was brought to audiences by the independent company Galaxy Releasing. The movie pulled in $5.1 million during its opening weekend, landing in the fourth spot at the U.S. box office. It kept playing through November 1989, raking in $449,000 over the weekend of November 3rd, 1989, across 537 screens. The film had a 3-month run, wrapping up in December 1989, with a total domestic gross of $11.6 million. It ended up being the least popular in its franchise, with around 2.9 million tickets sold during its initial release. Stephen Holden from the New York Times described the film as like taking another spin through a familiar funhouse, but he felt it was a bit more polished in its details than your typical horror flick. Variety slammed it as pretty dumb and dull, pointing out that it had become almost indistinguishable from the Friday the 13th movies. Richard Harrington of the Los Angeles Times called it a prime example of diminishing returns, and criticized Donald Pleasence for delivering a flat 2-note performance. Although he thought Danielle Harris did a solid job in her role, some critics took issue with the vague appearances of the Man in Black character, which remained unclear in the final cut. Gary Thompson from the Philadelphia Daily News highlighted this, saying, "His identity is never revealed, and his actions are never explained. What does this mean? It means the series has turned into a soap opera, trying to keep viewers hooked with cheap dramatic tricks borrowed from daytime TV." On a more positive note, Malcolm L. Johnson from the Hartford Courant praised the film, calling it the best sequel in the series and complimenting Othenin-Girard's artsy touch to the stalking and killings. On Rotten Tomatoes, only 11% of 27 critics gave it a thumbs up, with an average rating of 3.6 out of 10. The consensus on the site states, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers embraces basic slasher tropes with lackluster scares, forgettable characters, and aimless storytelling. The next Halloween film that didn't crack the top 10 is Halloween 2, 2009. Halloween 2, or just H2, is a slasher flick from 2009 that Rob Zombie wrote, directed, and produced. It's a follow-up to his 2007 remake of the classic 1978 Halloween and marks the 10th movie in the Halloween series. The plot centers around Laurie Strode as she copes with the fallout from the last film, Dr. Loomis trying to make a buck off it with a new book, and Michael Myers on a mission to find his sister. The movie brings back familiar faces from the 2007 version, including Malcolm McDowell as Loomis, Scout Taylor Compton as Strode, and Tyler Mane as Myers. Plus, Sherry Moon Zombie, Brad Dourif, and Danielle Harris are back in their roles from the previous film. Halloween 2 hit theaters on August 28, 2009 in North America, but received a pretty harsh response from critics. It was re-released on October 30th, 2009 to align with the Halloween weekend. The film's initial box office performance was disappointing, raking in around $7 million, which was less than the 2007 remake. Overall, it only made $39.4 million globally against a budget of $15 million. Rob Zombie chose not to direct another sequel, leading to the cancellation of Halloween 3D in 2012. This film marked the end of Dimension Films' involvement with the Halloween franchise, paving the way for the 2018 Halloween, which served as a direct sequel to the original 1978 film, produced by Blumhouse Productions and distributed by Universal Pictures. Rob Nelson from Variety thought the inclusion of Deborah and the White Horse was just plain silly. He wasn't a fan of Zombie's decision to shoot Halloween 2 in 16mm instead of the wider 35mm format he used for his 2007 remake. Nelson criticized the hospital scene, calling it a butchered version of Carpenter's 1981 sequel, and felt the rest of the film seemed rushed and slapped together at the last minute. On the flip side, Time Out had a different take, claiming the hospital scene at the beginning of the film outdid the 1981 sequel in almost every way. They praised Compton's performance as Laurie Strode, noting her intense, non-trivializing dedication to the role that kept viewers engaged, while pointing out that Dr. Loomis's self-centered storyline detracted from the overall plot. Time Out also mentioned that Zombie's attempt to illustrate how violence lingers and distorts those affected by it ultimately fell flat due to the carnivalesque violence he employed. And the last Halloween film that didn't crack the top 10 is Halloween Ends. Oh my God. Halloween Ends is a 2022 American romantic slasher flick directed by David Gordon Green, with a script co-written by Green, Danny McBride, Paul Brad Logan, and Chris Bernier. It serves as the sequel to Halloween Kills, 2021, and marks the 13th chapter in the Halloween series, wrapping up the trilogy that kicked off with the 2018 reboot, which is a direct continuation of the original 1978 film. The cast features Jamie Lee Curtis, Andy Matichak, Rohan Campbell, Will Patton, Kyle Richards, and James Jude Courtney. The story revolves around Corey Cunningham, an outsider who falls for Laurie Strode's granddaughter. But as he encounters Michael Myers, a chain of events pushes him down a dark path to becoming a serial killer. Halloween Ends made $64.1 million in the US and Canada, plus another $41.3 million from other regions, bringing its global total to $105.4 million. It turned out to be the least successful film in the trilogy directed by David Gordon Green. Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times rated the movie 1.5 out of 4 stars, saying that the finale of the Michael Myers story is just a mix of stabbing, metaphors, soap opera drama, marching band bullies, and more stabbing. Over at Variety, Owen Gleiberman described the film as neither scary nor enjoyable, labeling it the most joylessly metaphorical and complicated installment in the franchise so far. Now here's our feature presentation. Number 10, Halloween H2O, Halloween H20, 20 years later is a slasher flick from 1998, directed by Steve Miner. It features a star-studded cast including Jamie Lee Curtis, LL Cool J, Adam Arkin, Michelle Williams, Janet Leigh, and Josh Hartnett, who makes his film debut here. This movie is the 7th in the Halloween series and serves as a direct sequel to the original Halloween from 1978 and its follow-up, Halloween 2 from 1981, completely disregarding the Jamie Lloyd storyline from the last 3 films. The plot centers around Laurie Strode, who's dealing with some serious trauma after faking her own death to escape her psychotic brother, Michael Myers. He eventually tracks her down to a private boarding school in California, where she's been hiding out. Before the 2018 movie Halloween came out, Halloween H20 held the title for the highest grossing film in the Halloween series. It hit theaters in the US on August 5th, 1998, and later made its way to other countries. The film had a production budget of $17 million and raked in $55 million at the domestic box office, starting strong with an opening weekend of $16.1 million and a total of $24.7 million since its Wednesday release. With around 11,735,978 tickets sold during its original run, it still ranks as the 3rd most watched film in the franchise, outpacing the ticket sales of the previous 3 films combined. Mark Savlov, writing for the Austin Chronicle, commented on the film by saying that while Miner initially tries to capture the original's autumn vibe, he ultimately falls back on typical slasher cliches. It's great to see a cherished character make a comeback. At one point during the screening I was at, people even stood up and cheered. However, despite its bloody ambitions, H20 doesn't quite live up to the original. Number 9, Halloween 2007. Halloween is a slasher flick from 2007, crafted by Rob Zombie, who took on writing, directing, and producing duties. This film is a fresh take on John Carpenter's classic 1978 horror movie of the same name, and marks the 9th entry in the Halloween series. The cast includes Malcolm McDowell, Sherry Moon Zombie, Tyler Mane, Scout Taylor Compton, Brad Dourif, Danielle Harris, and William Forsythe. The story reimagines Michael Myers, who, after killing his family as a kid, ends up in a mental institution. He eventually escapes and goes on a terrifying hunt for Laurie Strode and her friends on Halloween night. On its first day, Halloween raked in $10.8 million, quickly outdoing the opening weekend earnings of Halloween 2 at $7.4 million, Season of the Witch at $6.3 million, The Return of Michael Myers, 1988, at $6.8 million, The Revenge of Michael Myers, 1989, at $5 million, and The Curse of Michael Myers at $7.3 million. Over the weekend from September 1st to 2nd, Halloween pulled in $8.5 and $6.9 million, bringing its total for the 3-day opening weekend to $26.3 million. It also added another $4.2 million on Labor Day, resulting in a total of $30.5 million for the 4-day holiday weekend, setting a new record for that holiday. According to 122 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, Halloween scored a 28% approval rating, averaging 4.40 out of 10. The consensus states, Rob Zombie doesn't introduce many fresh ideas in Halloween, resulting in yet another bloody letdown for franchise fans. In contrast, Metacritic, which gives a weighted score out of 100 based on mainstream critic reviews, rated it 47 out of 100 from 18 reviews, suggesting mixed or average reviews. CinemaScore surveys found that the average grade from moviegoers was a B- on an A+ to F scale, with 62% of the audience being male and 57% aged 25 or older. Number 8. Halloween Resurrection. Halloween Resurrection is a slasher flick from 2002, directed by Rick Rosenthal, who also helmed Halloween 2 back in 1981. The screenplay was crafted by Larry Brand and Sean Hood. This movie serves as a direct sequel to Halloween H20, 20 years later, and marks the 8th entry in the Halloween series. It features a cast that includes Busta Rhymes, Bianca Kajlish, Thomas Ian Nicholas, Ryan Merriman, Sean Patrick Thomas, Tyra Banks, and Jamie Lee Curtis, with Brad Loree taking on the role of the iconic villain, Michael Myers. This film wraps up the H20 timeline of the franchise, which had been rebooted with the 1998 film before seeing another reboot in 2007 and yet another in 2018. The plot revolves around Myers as he continues his killing spree in Haddonfield, where his old house is turned into a live internet horror show. Halloween Resurrection hit theaters on July 12, 2002, but only managed to pull in $37.6 million globally, despite having a budget of $15 million. Even though there were plans for another sequel after Resurrection, the next installment turned out to be a remake of Halloween in 2007, directed by Rob Zombie. On Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a pretty low approval rating of 10% from 70 reviews, with an average score of 3.4 out of 10. The consensus on the site says, the only thing this tired slasher flick might bring back is nostalgia for when the genre was actually fresh and scary. Over on Metacritic, it scored a dismal 19 out of 100 based on 17 reviews, which shows overwhelming dislike. Meanwhile, audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave it a decent B+ on the A+ to F scale. Dave Keir from the New York Times noted, "Viewers will definitely be sitting there with their mouths open, not screaming, but yawning." Peter Travers from Rolling Stone quipped, "Every sequel you skip is 2 hours you gain." Think of this review as life-affirming. Joe Layden from Variety remarked, "It feels even more pointless and shamelessly cash-grabbing than most low-tier horror sequels." Number 7. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers is a slasher flick from 1995, directed by Joe Chappelle and penned by Daniel Franz. It features a cast that includes Donald Pleasence, Paul Rudd, Marianne Hagan, and Mitch Ryan. This movie is the sixth in the Halloween series and follows Michael Myers as he goes after the baby son of his niece, Jamie Lloyd. It dives deeper into the supernatural horror aspects that were only hinted at in the previous installment, particularly focusing on a cult that manipulates Myers to eliminate his own family using an ancient rune called Thorn. This film also marks Donald Pleasence's last role as Dr. Sam Loomis before he passed away, and it's Paul Rudd's first appearance in a feature film, where he plays an adult Tommy Doyle from the original Halloween, 1978. Halloween. The Curse of Michael Myers hit theaters on September 29, 1995, in the U.S. It kicked off with a $7.3 million opening weekend, landing in second place behind the thriller Seven. This was the first installment in the series to match the opening weekend earnings of Halloween 2, especially since Halloween 4 and 5 both made less than $7 million. Overall, the film did pretty well financially, raking in a total of $15.1 million at the U.S. box office, with a budget of around $5 million. Number 6. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch is a sci-fi horror flick from 1982 and the third movie in the Halloween series. This one marks the first time Tommy Lee Wallace took the reins as both writer and director. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who were behind the original Halloween and its sequel, are back as producers. The cast includes Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, and Dan O'Herlihy. What's interesting about Halloween the Third is that it's the only film in the series that doesn't have Michael Myers as the main villain. After it didn't do well with audiences and at the box office, they decided to bring Michael back in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers in 1988. Halloween 3 had a budget of $4.6 million and managed to pull in $14.4 million at the US box office, making it profitable. However, it was the least successful film in the Halloween franchise back then. While most critics weren't kind to it initially, over the years people have started to see it as a unique cult classic. The film has a 50% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average score of 5.3 out of 10 from 36 reviews. The consensus on the site says, while it tries to break away from the usual series formula, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch still falls short with weak thrills and questionable storytelling. Over on Metacritic, it also sits at a score of 50% based on 11 critic reviews, suggesting mixed or average feedback. There's a lot of academic chatter around this film, highlighting its critiques of late 20th century American culture. Historian Nicholas Rogers points out that it has an anti-corporate theme, where a seemingly successful businessman gets oddly irrational and aims to push for a future that's more robotic in terms of commerce. He notes that Cochran's irrational, astrological obsessions or psychotic hatred of children completely overshadow his business acumen. Tony Williams adds that the plot reflects the consequences of patriarchal corporate dominance. Similarly, Martin Harris mentions that Halloween 3 delivers a cynical critique of American consumer culture. Frustrated by how Halloween has been commercialized, Cochran turns the very medium he despises into a weapon against itself. Harris also points out other critiques in the film regarding big business, like local job losses and the drop in quality of mass-produced items. Number 5. Halloween 2 is a slasher flick from 1981, marking the directorial debut of Rick Rosenthal. It was written and produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, featuring Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasence, reprising their roles as Laurie Strode and Dr. Sam Loomis. This movie is the second in the Halloween series and picks up right where the first one left off, with Michael Myers stalking Laurie to the hospital while Dr. Loomis is hot on his trail. Universal Pictures handled the distribution, and the film hit theaters in the U.S. on October 30th, 1981. It got a mixed bag of reviews from critics and pulled in $25 million at the box office. On the review site Rotten Tomatoes, this film has a 33% approval rating from 48 reviews, with an average score of 4.80 out of 10. The critical consensus on the site states, Halloween 2 continues right where the last one ended, but quickly gets lost in a dead end that the series would struggle to escape for years. Over on Metacritic, which gives a normalized score to reviews, the film has a weighted average of 40 out of 100 based on 11 critics, suggesting mixed or average reviews. Many critics weren't fans of the film's increased violence. Kevin Thomas from the Los Angeles Times criticized it for its reprehensible content, stating that Halloween 2 as a sequel just adds more bodies to the pile. Roman Cooney from the Calgary Herald pointed out that while the film isn't as bloody as some others, certain murder scenes are so shockingly gruesome that they come off as tasteless and distressing. He also mentioned that the plot feels more convenient than complex, relying on a cast of bland characters that are just waiting to be knocked down like dominoes. Number 4. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers is a slasher flick from 1988, directed by Dwight H. Little and penned by Alan B. McElroy. It features Donald Pleasence, Ellie Cornell, and Danielle Harris, who makes her film debut, along with Michael Pataki. This movie is the fourth in the Halloween series and serves as a direct sequel to Halloween 2, 1981, bringing Michael Myers back as the main villain while completely disregarding the storyline of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, 1982. A decade after his infamous killing spree, the injured Michael Myers stirs back to life on Halloween Eve and heads back to Haddonfield with a deadly mission to take out his 7-year-old niece. The film hit theaters in the U.S. on October 21, 1988. Even though it received a lot of negative feedback from critics, it managed to pull in $17.8 million at the box office against a $5 million budget. Over the years, it has gained a dedicated cult following and has been looked at more favorably in recent times. The movie didn't do too well with critics when it came out. On Rotten Tomatoes, only 39% of the 31 reviews were positive, and it has an average score of 4.2 out of 10. The consensus on the site says, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers brings back the series' iconic killer, but it doesn't deliver the intense scares or creativity of the original. Kim Newman from Empire pointed out, it's amazing how a film can mimic Carpenter's thrilling original so closely and still end up being so dull, unscary, and slow like Halloween 4. In 2000, he gave the film just 1 out of 5 stars in Empire magazine, calling it uninspired, predictable, and just plain dumb. Number 3, Halloween Kills. Halloween Kills is a slasher flick from 2021, directed by David Gordon Green and co-written by Green, Danny McBride, and Scott Teems. It follows up on the 2018 Halloween movie and is the 12th entry in the Halloween series. The cast includes Jamie Lee Curtis, Judy Greer, Andy Matichak, Will Patton, Thomas Mann, and Anthony Michael Hall. The story picks up right where the last film left off, with James Jude Courtney back as Michael Myers, whose terrifying presence is felt by the folks in Haddonfield. The movie raked in $92 million in the US and Canada, plus another $41.4 million internationally, bringing its total to $133.4 million worldwide. During its initial run in theaters, it sold a little over 9 million tickets. According to Samba TV, it was viewed in 2.8 million households within the first month on Peacock. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 39% approval rating from 280 reviews, with an average score of 5 out of 10. The critical consensus on the site says, Halloween Kills should please fans looking for some intense slasher action, but when it comes to moving the franchise forward, it doesn't quite add up to its gory parts. Over on Metacritic, it has a weighted average score of 42 out of 100 from 45 critics, which suggests mixed or average reviews. Meanwhile, audiences polled by CinemaScore gave it a B- average grade on the A+ to F scale, which is a step down from the B+ that its 2018 predecessor received. Owen Gleiberman from Variety said that while Halloween Night might be Michael Myers' best work, Halloween Kills definitely isn't. He called it a chaotic slasher flick that rarely delivers any scares, filled with irrelevant social commentary and too many plot lines that lead nowhere. Meanwhile, Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times rated it 2 out of 4 stars, labeling it a thudding disappointment and a messy, inconsistent film. On a brighter note, Aidan Juvett from Bleeding Cool described it as a valuable middle chapter of a trilogy. Number 2, Halloween, 2018. Halloween is a slasher flick from 2018, directed by David Gordon Green and co-written by Green, Jeff Fradley, and Danny McBride. It's the 11th movie in the Halloween series and serves as a direct sequel to the original 1978 film, ignoring all the sequels that came after. Jamie Lee Curtis is back as Laurie Strode, while James Jude Courtney takes on the role of Michael Myers, with Nick Castle making a cameo. The cast also includes Judy Greer, Andy Matichak, Will Patton, Haluk Bilginer, and Virginia Gardner. The story centers on a traumatized Laurie Strode gearing up to confront Michael Myers in a final showdown on Halloween night, 4 decades after she escaped his rampage. The film raked in $159.3 million in the US and Canada, plus another $100.6 million internationally, totaling $259.9 million worldwide. Deadline Hollywood estimated the film's net profit at $128.5 million after accounting for all costs and earnings. It pulled in $7.7 million from Thursday night previews, making it the 4th highest for an R-rated horror film, following It Chapter 2, and Paranormal Activity 3. Halloween went on to earn $33.3 million on its opening day, including previews, and debuted with $76.2 million, which was the 2nd best opening weekend in October, just behind Venom. At the time, it was Blumhouse's biggest debut, later overtaken by Five Nights at Freddy's in 2023, and the highest in the Halloween franchise. It also set a record for the best opening for a film led by an actress over 55. With just its opening weekend, it became the highest-grossing film in the franchise. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 79% from 385 reviews, with an average score of 6.8 out of 10. The critical consensus on the site states, Halloween effectively resets the franchise after years of lackluster sequels, opting for straightforward yet impactful elements over complex mythology. Over on Metacritic, it has a weighted average score of 67 out of 100, based on 51 reviews, which suggests generally favorable reviews. CinemaScore polls show that audiences rated it a B+ on an A+ to F scale. Peter DeBruge from Variety noted that the film returns the series to its origins, describing it as a fan service move wrapped in a horror flick. The fact that it succeeds on both fronts means David Gordon Green achieved his goal, wrapping up the mythology set by Carpenter while providing fresh thrills and creatively gruesome kills for a new generation. Jonathan Barkin from Dread Central remarked, Halloween pays a heartfelt tribute to the 1978 classic while boldly asserting its own identity. This might be the scariest version of Michael Myers we've seen. Christopher Stewardson from Our Culture. Mag commented, by raising intriguing questions about our desensitization to horror, Halloween presents Michael Myers in a contemporary context with thoughtfulness and calculated scares. Number 1, Halloween, 1978. Halloween, also known as John Carpenter's Halloween, is a slasher film from 1978 that was both directed and scored by John Carpenter, who teamed up with producer Deborah Hill to co-write the script. The movie features Donald Pleasence, Jamie Lee Curtis, making her film debut, PJ Soles, and Nancy Loomis. Taking place mainly in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, the story revolves around Michael Myers, a mental patient who was locked away for killing his teenage sister on Halloween night when he was a kid. After escaping 15 years later, he returns to Haddonfield to stalk babysitter Laurie Strode and her friends, while his psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, tries to track him down. Released by Compass International and Aquarius, releasing on October 25th, 1978, the film made a whopping $70 million from a budget of just $300,000 to $325,000, making it one of the most successful independent films ever. Critics have lauded Carpenter's direction and score, and many see this film as the starting point for a wave of slasher flicks that followed in the footsteps of Psycho, 1960, and Black Christmas, 1974. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential horror movies of all time. In 2006, the Library of Congress even chose it for preservation in the National Film Registry, recognizing its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. The Los Angeles Times called the film a well-crafted yet hollow and grim thriller, while Bill Von Maurer from the Miami Times thought it was unexpectedly good, pointing out that if you're in the right age and mood, Halloween is genuinely terrifying. Susan Stark of the Detroit Free Press labeled Halloween as a rising cult classic upon its release, describing it as extremely moody and complimenting its direction and soundtrack. Gene Siskel from the Chicago Tribune rated the film 3.5 stars out of 4, describing it as a beautifully crafted thriller that works because director Carpenter knows how to create suspense while also making us smile. He builds up the anticipation for a scare and then holds off on delivering it for varying lengths of time. The tension is intense. More than once during the film, I found myself glancing around to ensure no one strange was behind me. Roger Ebert echoed similar sentiments in his 1979 review for the Chicago Sun-Times, calling it a visceral experience. We're not just watching the movie, we're living it. It's genuinely frightening. If you're not into really scary films, then skip this one. Ebert also included it in his top 10 films of 1978. Critics who initially dismissed it later became impressed by Carpenter's clever camera work and minimalist score, as well as the surprising absence of blood and graphic violence.
Hey, before you go, could you please like, comment, subscribe, share, and turn on all notifications? That means hitting the bell. Good day.